Order, order. Have received notification from the petition officer for the constituency of Rutherglen and Hamilton West in respect of the recall petition for Margaret Farrier. The recall petition closed on Monday, the 31st of July. As more than 10% of those eligible to sign up the petition did so. The petition was successful and the seat is accordingly vacant. I shall cause the text of the notification to be published in the votes and proceedings and in the official report. Order, order. Will members wishing to take their seats please come forward to the table?
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
Too many queues.
It can be so. That can be sorted.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law.
Order, order. Owen Thompson.
I beg to move that Mr Speaker do issue his warrant to the Clerk of the Crown to make out a new writ for the electing of a member to serve in this present Parliament for the borough constituency of Rutherglen and Hamilton West in the room of Margaret Ferrier, against whom, since her election for the said borough constituency, a recall petition has been successful.
The question is that I do issue my warrant to the Clerk of the Crown to make out the new writ for the electing of a member to serve in the present Parliament for the borough constituency of Rutherglen and Hamilton West in the room of Margaret Ferrier, against whom, since her election for the said borough constituency, a recall petition has been successful. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Simon Hart.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I beg to move that on the 12th day of September 2023, Mr Speaker do issue his warrant to the Clerk of the Crown to make out a new writ for the electing of a member to serve in this present Parliament for the county constituency of Mid-Bedfordshire in the room of Nadine Vanessa Doris, who since her election for the said county constituency has been appointed to the office of Steward and Bailiff of His Majesty's 3 Chiltern Hundreds of Stoke, Desborough and Burnham in the county of Buckingham.
The question is that on the 12th day of September 2023, I do issue my warrant to the Clerk of the Crown to make out a new writ for the electing of a member to serve in this present Parliament for the county constituency of Mid-Bedfordshire in the room of Nadine Vanessa Doris, who since her election to the said county constituency has been appointed to the office of Steward or Bailiff of His Majesty's 3 Chiltern Hundreds of Stoke, Desborough and Burnham in the county of Buckingham. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Don't you know? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I wish to inform the House that I have received a letter from the Honourable Member for Bristol North West informing me of his resignation as the Chair of Business and Trade Committee. I therefore declare the chair vacant. I will announce the arrangements for the election of the new chair in due course. Right, let's see if we can start the business. We start with questions. Secretary of State for Works and Pensions, Christian Wakeford.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's good to be back, and I trust that you had some rest this recess, at least, and I wanted to extend my welcome to those new members who have just taken their place. With permission, Mr Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 1, 2 and 7 together. The regional employment rate gap is 7.7 percentage points. That is 1.2 percentage points lower than in 2010 and low by historic standards.
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the Marmot Review shows us, there's a strong correlation between indices of deprivation and addiction. This is an issue affecting all regions, but those poorer regions even more so. So can the Minister outline what policies are in place across the regions to address this issue of addiction and thus support more people staying in and getting into employment, particularly in the North West?
Well, Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman will be aware of universal support and the Workwell pilots, which are bringing together healthcare in exactly the kind of areas to which he is referring, along with seeking work, which my party believes is one of the best ways of remedying the kind of issues that he refers to, including mental health issues.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 87 years since the Jarrow March against unemployment, and my constituents are still being let down. We have a higher percentage of people claiming unemployment benefits than the national average, and the reality is worse when you factor in hidden unemployment. According to the Centre for Cities, 9 out of 10 places with the highest hidden unemployment rates are in the north. Instead of continuing with false rhetoric on levelling up, when will this government stop neglecting and start investing in our northern communities?
Mr Speaker, I have absolutely no problem at all in defending the government's record on employment in particular. There are now almost 4 million more in employment than there were in 2010. That includes around 2 million more women. And of course, unemployment across the country, including in the north, is at near historic low levels.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In his blog today on Conservative Home, the noble Lord Ashcroft says that on the cost of living, 2/3 of voters thought the government could do more to help, but was choosing not to. Given the regional disparity in earnings, does the Minister accept that the rollout of fair pay agreements providing sectoral minimum terms, as outlined in Labour's New Deal for Working People, will not only boost the economy, but will also address the blight of in-work poverty and insecure work that impacts so many households in my Middlesbrough constituency and right across the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raises the issue of support during this cost of living squeeze that we're experiencing at the moment. Of course, my department's been responsible for distributing millions of payments to people, to the most vulnerable, £900 in total to 8 million low-income households, £150 to 6 million disabled people, and of course the £300 payment to pensioners. And we've also, on the question of work, put up the national living wage by over 9% to £10.42 this April.
All may now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In parts of my constituency, the healthy life expectancy is now just 53 to 54, a true regional inequality if ever there is one. That means that people, even at the minister's age group, are dropping out of work far too early before it's good for either them or the economy. What steps is the department taking as a consequence of the Health and Disability White Paper to address this very serious inequality?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already mentioned the measures that we brought forward at the last budget, universal support and work well. The government is, of course, always constantly looking at how we can go further in that respect. But I would say of the over 50 specifically that the midlife MOT that we're running, the retrainerships and, of course, the changes to the pension tax arrangements are all helping to bear down on economic inactivity amongst that group.
News from Kettering is that at 3.6%, the overall unemployment rate is below the national average of 3.7%. But the bad news from Kettering is that there are 420 18 to 24-year-olds without work, and the youth unemployment rate is 6.2% versus the national average of 4.7%. So what is the Secretary of State doing to help address the issue of youth unemployment?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend will be pleased to know that since 2010 youth unemployment has fallen by over 40%, which is completely the mirror image of what happened under the last Labour government when it rose by over 40%. But to his specific question, I would point him towards the youth offer that we have recently announced that we will be expanding to even more young people.
Shadow Minister Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought the Secretary of State understood that whilst unemployment is at historic lows, I thought he knew that actually economic inactivity is the big challenge before us, particularly when it comes to regional economic inactivity, with a huge near 10-point gap across the regions. East Midlands, London, North East, North West, West Midlands, all having higher inactivity rates than the South East. Mr. Speaker, the Tories have had 13 years to close this gap. So can I ask the Secretary of State, is his plan really that making levelling up an actual reality is to leave it to Labour?
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that when it comes to unemployment, there's never been a Labour government that's left office with unemployment anything other than higher than when they found it in the first place, I don't think I'd certainly leave employment to Labour. But to her point, Mr. Speaker, economic inactivity is very important. It's a major focus for my department, and it has, of course, reduced very substantially since its peak during the pandemic, fallen by around 350,000.
Number 3, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government recognises the pressures people are facing and have acted and are providing cost of living support worth over £94 billion between 22 and 24 to help households and individuals with those rising costs. This includes cost of living payments totalling up to £900 in 23-24 for over 8 million households on eligible means-tested benefits. We've successfully delivered the first payment of £301 to 8.3 million households earlier this year, and the second payment of £300 will be paid in autumn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the government is indeed giving very generous cost of living support to households on certain means-tested benefits this winter. And if you are on one of those means-tested benefits and then earn £1 more, you have the potential for losing the full payment. And I wondered if she had noticed any change in behaviour from people as a result of that disincentive to take on extra work.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that point, and it's absolutely vital that those on low incomes, or indeed those who are keen to work more, see the incentives. And in terms of the spring's budget, we announced an ambitious package of measures to support people to take up work, to importantly progress and always be better off. And we've made significant investment into childcare to support that as well. And of course, the largest ever cash increase to the national living wage, up to £10.42. And I would say to those people, have a look at the benefits calculator on .gov.uk, because you'll always be better off in work than not being in work.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rents have risen very sharply over the last couple of years, but the support for people claiming means-tested benefits to pay their rent, determined by local housing allowance, hasn't changed at all since 2020. It's been completely frozen. I wrote to the Secretary of State about this over the summer. Is the Minister able to give the House any assurance that the forthcoming benefit uprating statement will include a realistic increase for local housing allowance?
Yeah.
I thank the honourable gentleman, the chair of the Select Committee. I know it's something he's very interested in, and myself indeed. And again, that help for households is there, with the local housing allowance raised to the 30th percentile in 2020. And of course, government is projected to spend around £31 billion in support for renters. That's around 1.2% of GDP, Mr. Speaker, in 23-24. And absolutely, it's right that we support people to be better off. The LHA is not intended to cover all areas and all rents in all areas, but of course it's an area that I take close interest in.
Chris Elmore.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 4 and 10 together and also welcome the 3 new colleagues. The independent ONS estimate that notwithstanding a recent uptick, the unemployment rate is now almost half the rate we inherited in 2010 and back to pre-pandemic levels.
Chris Elmore.
Well, actually, Mr. Speaker, according to their own figures, after 3.5 years from when the pandemic began, employment is not back to pre-pandemic levels. Can the Minister set out the unanticipated rise in unemployment, says about the underlying health of the economy? Because it isn't looking good, is it, Minister?
Well, with great respect, I disagree. Employment is at record levels. Vacancies are down for the last 10 quarters. Payroll is at a record high. Pay is up. Inflation is down. And we're doing an awful lot better than that lot would.
Judith,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, in my constituency of Bradford South, we've seen a summer of job cuts, with both Morrison's and Solenis announcing major redundancies. So does the Minister agree with me that this shows that the government's plan to grow the economy is failing?
Yeah. Well, I should make the point that its payroll employment is at a record high, Mr. Speaker. There are 4 million more people into work since 2010. The unemployment rate is down to 4.2% across the UK. That is at near record lows. Clearly, our job centres are doing a fantastic job, and I'm fully in support of all the work that is going on in Bradford to try and address these issues.
Gerald Jones.
Fine, Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I will take question 5 with question 13. In April, the state pension saw its largest ever rise of 10.1%, thanks to the triple lock protecting pensioners.
Earl Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that 770,000 pensioners are eligible for pension credit, but are not receiving it. A few months ago, I joined with my local Citizens Advice Pool to organise a Pension Credit Action Day, and as a result, an additional £200,000 was drawn down for people across Smith, Tidwell and Rumney. Now, the government have the data. They can do a lot more targeted approach to this issue and get people who are eligible to apply. So why is the government not taking this action, and when can we see more action from them?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for the work that he's doing in his constituency, and I'd like to assure him that that is exactly what we are doing as a government. We recently launched an invitation to claim trial, which is being rolled out in 10 constituencies, which is using housing benefit data to target those who might be also eligible for pension credit. We'll report back on the results of those trials later this year.
Samantha Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It might be hard to imagine on a sunny day like today, but winter's just around the corner. And the reality for many worried pensioners in my constituency is that this winter there'll be a choice between heating or eating. We have a government who are tiptoeing around real issues while our constituents struggle to make ends meet. When will the government make a real plan to tackle the cost of living crisis and implement meaningful actions to help thousands of pensioners in poverty?
With respect to the Honourable Lady, that's exactly what we are doing. That is why we have put the cost of living payments in place, which are worth £900 to all those on pension credit. That is why we have a cost of living pensioner payment worth £300, which is coming out in the winter. And I should also point out that all the while, the Labour Mayor of London is charging pensioners £12.50 when they want to drive to the hospital.
Blackman.
Speaker, clearly there's a stigma attached to claiming pension credit, because this is on poorer pensioners that desperately need the money. What action can my honourable friend take to take away this stigma? My constituency has recently been added to the pilot, and I'm looking forward to the results of that, because elderly people deserve to get the money they need in order to fulfil their lives.
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, and I praise all the work that he has done in his constituency on pension credit. That is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to encourage as many people as possible to try and claim this really important benefit at a time when they're going to need it most. And I note that across the House there's been very good work in individual constituencies.
Shadow Minister Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As inflation rises, being able to top up pension contributions is absolutely vital for many part-time workers who would otherwise not be able to claim the full state pension. However, a Daily Mail investigation showed that the government is failing to accurately record people's top-up contributions. Mr. Speaker, pensioners are terrified that their money has simply disappeared. So when will the government get a grip of this terrible problem, and when will ministers show they actually understand the pressure on families and pensioners due to the cost of living crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, with the comprehensive package of support that I've talked about today, we have shown that we are taking action during the cost of living crisis to help pensioners as much as we can. We know accuracy is absolutely the most important thing where it comes to state pension. That's why we've taken action very quickly to correct issues where they have occurred, for example, with LEAP, and we will do the same in all such cases.
Priti Patel.
6, Mr. Speaker.
I know that my right honourable friend is a champion for job creation in Essex, and our job centres in Essex are working with a range of employers and partners to address recruitment on an ongoing basis. For example, last Wednesday, Mr. Speaker, Essex Job Centres hosted a recruitment event at Stansted Airport to match constituents of my right honourable friend and parliamentary colleagues from Saffron Walden, Braintree and Colchester to dozens of catering, hospitality and logistics-based jobs.
Priti Patel.
Mr. Speaker, well, Essex is a powerhouse when it comes to jobs and employment, and there's always more to do, and businesses are saying that they are finding barriers to create more jobs. So can the Minister just give an update on how he's working across government to create a labour market strategy to help enable businesses, really to help recruit, but also lower taxes of businesses, the burdens that they face, and in particular just make it easier for small businesses, in particular in Essex, counties like Essex, to start employing more people and to recruit?
I endorse pretty much everything that my honourable friend says. We are clearly working with other departments to ensure that we are doing everything possible to address recruitment. For example, I saw the T-levels that are being pioneered at South Essex College when I visited there recently. I've seen the apprenticeships that are being driven forward locally, and recently at Whittam there was the midlife MOT that took place in the middle of last month to address older workers. But there is more to do, and we are certainly trying to do that across departments.
Monaghan.
Mr. Speaker, in Essex, like many other parts of the UK, the number of people off work due to chronic illness is significantly higher now than pre-pandemic. Now, forcing sick people into work is not an appropriate way of dealing with this. So can the Minister confirm that work capability assessments will be reasonable and will consider all aspects of the individual's life, whether they really are fit for work?
Yeah.
Well, she's a long way from Essex, Mr. Speaker. But the practical reality is she'll be aware that we have over 1 million more disabled people in work, and obviously the WCA will continue on an ongoing basis until there is reform.
Vicky Ford.
From Essex, question 8.
The DWP has conducted an extensive campaign across TV, radio, social media and with partners to boost pension credit take-up, with a number of pushes before the cost of living payment deadlines. I'm pleased to say to the House that this is working. Applications were up 75% in the year to May.
Vicky Ford.
Speaker, one of my Chancellor constituents has sent me a message that's been circulating recently. It suggests that asylum seekers are entitled to receive more in benefits than pensioners, and I believe this is not accurate. Therefore, can the Minister confirm for the record what support is available for pensioners compared to what support is available for asylum seekers?
Let me reassure my right honourable friend that, and her constituents that asylum seekers are given no recourse to public funds. They're given payments for their food and shelter but unable to claim benefits. Pensioners in her constituency will be receiving a state pension if they qualify, which is now worth on average over £200 a week and over £10,000 a year for the first time. Pensioners who have not built up sufficient contributions may be eligible for pension credit, which can top up their income and is worth on average £3,500 per year. They're also eligible for the cost of living payments if they receive pension credit, and also the pensioner cost of living payment.
Catherine Smith.
Speaker. Over the summer, I did events in the villages across Wyre in my constituency, and I was approached by many pensioners who are suffering with the cost of living crisis, and pension credit is just not plugging the gap. My constituent at my Chats for Cat event in Pilling asked me why there are 400,000 more pensioners living in poverty now than when Labour left office. I wonder if the Minister could answer that question.
Mr. Speaker, there are 200,000 fewer pensioners in absolute poverty than when Labour left office.
Green.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assessments play an important part in ensuring people get the right entitlement. It is the claimant's chance to give all the information needed to help make the right decision. The assessment, which measures the impact of a health condition on a person's ability to live independently, is kept under constant review, and I'm sure that the Honourable Lady is familiar with our white paper tests and trials too.
Green.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his question. His answer. He will know that one of the challenges with PIP is how to accurately assess fluctuating conditions. There are over 500,000 people in the UK living with Crohn's disease or colitis, but fewer than 3% are in receipt of PIP. Past applicants have said that whilst fatigue is the most disabling symptom, it's the one they feel is least represented in their assessments. Would the Minister consider introducing a fatigue rating scale to PIP assessments to more effectively capture what is for many the most debilitating component of their condition?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for her interest in this issue, and we, of course, through the White Paper reforms, have advocated for a number of tests and trials, including one that wants to focus specifically on better capturing fluctuating conditions. I would certainly be keen to have conversations with her about that, and there is an absolute commitment from the government to work with charities and those that are interested, disabled people, to make sure we get those reforms right.
Nigel Mills.
I agree with the importance of having a timely assessment. I had a constituent last week who raised the case of being given 2 weeks to fill in her renewal form 9 months ago, and now gets given less than 2 weeks later for an assessment next week. Surely we need to actually have assessments when the form is fresh and accurate, not 9 months later.
Well, it's fair to say that the waiting time for PIP decisions has considerably come down in recent times, but I'm not complacent about this. We want to go further in seeing those waits reduce. I think, for example, being able to apply online is an important part of that journey, improving those interfaces, making sure that people provide all of the right information up front, and the better we can support that to help us make decisions sooner, that can only be a welcome thing.
Sir Christopher Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I urge the Minister to look specifically at how PIP is assessed for those with brain injuries? It's well known, of course, not only that the effect of the brain injury may vary over time and may go up and down, but also that many people who have a brain injury may want to give a very positive impression of how they are, which actually, of course, gives a false impression when it comes to assessing whether they need PIP.
So I'm very sympathetic to the point that the honourable gentleman makes, and I know that he's been a passionate and tireless campaigner on the issue of brain injury for a long time. I think these are exactly the sorts of issues that we want to look at as we take this reform forward. I've mentioned our changes around fluctuating conditions, but also things like expert assessors, having specialists working with individuals to carry out that assessment to make sure there's a proper understanding and hopefully build confidence around decision making as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our excellent proactive Minister is no doubt testing out concepts ahead of the forthcoming white paper. Can I ask, does this extend or include extending the severe conditions criteria so conditions like MND could automatically access support without the need of an assessment?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the current Minister for Disabled People was very fortunate to have my honourable friend as one of those who went before him. He was a tireless campaigner on these issues and has done so much to take this agenda forward. I'm pleased to be able to say that in terms of the severe disability group, we remain committed to that. We've worked with an expert group of specialist health professionals to draw up a set of draft criteria. We've started initial testing at small scale, and we're now looking to scale that up as we move forward because we want to get this right and we think this is a significant change.
Number 11, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 11 and 16 together. Access to Work has received a significant increase in applications over the last year and have recruited new staff to meet the increased demand and reduce the time it takes to make decisions. We're also transforming the Access to Work service through increased digitalisation that will make the service more efficient, will make the application process easier and improve the time taken from application through to decision.
Well, I think the Minister knows that the waiting times are too long for all applicants, but could I draw his attention to an event in Cambridge I hosted earlier this year with the local job centre where we highlighted employment opportunities for the neurodivergent community. So could you tell us what impact these long waits have on people who are neurodivergent?
Well, I'm sure that the honourable gentleman will be pleased to know that last week 88% of claims were paid within 10 days, and there are steps that we are taking to drive further improvement. Of course, the online application capacity that we now have on stream that came in as of June is a significant part of that, but we're also putting additional staff on processing claims. We are streamlining various processes in order to make sure that people are getting access to that support sooner, and officials anecdotally are telling me that's beginning to bear fruit. But what we're not doing is speeding that process up at the cost of getting the right decision and the right outcome. So we will continue to move this forward, and we're already making progress.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A decade ago, the government's SACE review recommended supporting 100,000 disabled people through specialist employment programmes. But last year, Access to Work helped just 38,000, and Versus Arthritis and other organisations supporting people navigate this difficult system saw a tripling in the delays. So when will the department meet the 100,000 target and end the delays, hitting disabled people, employers and the UK economy?
Well, like him, I'm very passionate about the difference and the positive difference that Access to Work makes in terms of opening up employment opportunities for people. He'll be aware, for example, of the passports that we've introduced to help better understand what people's needs are and passporting that between jobs and between, for example, education and employment. I'd refer him back to the steps that I've already set out that we've taken to see improvement in the journey times, but we will continue to work tirelessly to make sure that people are getting access to this Access to Work help as quickly as possible.
Shadow Minister Vicky.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In January, it was found that Access to Work backlog had trebled since February 2020, rising to more than 25,000. And in June, the Minister claimed additional resource was being put into Access to Work. So will he inform the House exactly how many additional staff are working to clear the backlog and when he expects it to return to pre-pandemic levels? His government says it wants to get more people into work, yet disabled people are missing out on jobs because of unacceptable delays at the DWP.
Well, what I can say for the House's benefit, that in terms of full-time equivalent staffing levels in the Access to Work team, 6 months ago now, and once the staff in Bradford have moved to Access to Work, the figure stood at 375.22 full-time equivalents in March 2023, 462.84 full-time equivalents on the 4th of September 2023, and that figure will stand at 530.41 full-time equivalents expected by the end of October 2023, with additional staff moving to the Access to Work team in Bradford. But I'd also direct your attention again to that figure from last week, that 88% of claims were paid within 10 days. This is a priority for me as the Minister for Disabled People and for the Department as a whole.
Thompson.
12, Mr Speaker.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions numbers 12 and 21 together. The Government's firm belief is that the best route out of poverty is through work, and we know that in 2021-22, the most recent statistics, Mr Speaker, there were 400,000 fewer children in absolute poverty after housing costs than in 2009-10.
Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A recent study by the University of York found that the two-child limit and the benefit cap had contributed to rising levels of child poverty, which, allied to wider benefit cuts, had impacted larger families disproportionately. Given the growing weight of evidence, will this government finally acknowledge the harm, the very real harm, that their welfare policies are causing, and reverse these cruel and callous policies which are pushing families into further hardship?
Families on benefits should face the same financial choices when deciding to grow their family as those supporting themselves solely through work. A benefit structure adjusting automatically to family size is unsustainable.
Amy Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A report by the Child Poverty Action Group showed the two-child limit affects 1 in 10 children across the UK. They found abolishing this policy would be the most cost-effective action this government could take to reduce child poverty. Why won't he take this action? Is child poverty so low on his priority list that he hasn't considered it, or did he consider it then decide that vulnerable children just aren't worth it?
The Government is committed to a sustainable long-term approach to tackling poverty and supporting people on low incomes. We will spend around £276 billion through the welfare system in 2023-24, including around £124 billion on people of working age and children.
SNP spokesperson David Lund.
Very much, Mr Speaker. The two-child limit impacts people who are on in-work benefits, something the Minister seems to forget. The only exemption that's in place for the two-child limit is if a woman can prove that her third or subsequent child has been born as a result of rape. How many people has the Minister's department asked to prove they've been raped in order to get exemption from the two-child limit?
We don't use the language used by the Honourable Gentleman, but I, of course, will write to him.
David Linden.
The Minister does not know because his department has made 2,590 women prove and relive the ordeal of being raped simply in order to get that state support. But given that the Labour Party and the Conservatives support the two-child policy and rape clause, does it give him comfort to know that when the ghost of George Osborne future comes into office, that his legacy in promoting child poverty rates that are astronomical will be safe in the hands of the Blairites on this side of the House?
Well, I can only repeat, Mr Speaker, that as compared to 2009-10, there are 400,000 fewer children in absolute poverty after housing costs.
Fletcher.
Question number 14, please, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We continue to bear down on fraud and error. It decreased by 10% in 22-23. There is, of course, still more to be done, which is why we're investing £900 million to reduce that figure still further by £2.4 billion by 24-25.
Mark Fletcher.
During the pandemic, the government rightly got support out to people as quickly as possible, but that inevitably meant that errors were made and some people took advantage of the situation. So can I ask the Secretary of State what is being done to clamp down on fraud and errors in universal credit?
The answer to that, Mr Speaker, is a huge amount, including the targeted case review which over the next 5 years will review hundreds and hundreds of thousands of universal claims to credit claims to look for fraud and error, and of course we use emerging new technologies for that purpose as well.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for that answer. Minister, I absolutely support the principle of those who carry out benefit fraud must be made accountable. But what I find in my office, Mr. Speaker, and I think others in the side of the chamber probably will find it as well, is many people who have inadvertently filled in an application form or a document or a review and have ticked the wrong box. By doing so, they let themselves in a very difficult position where they find they have to make a repayment. Sometimes people need help at the initial stages to make sure they get it right. Can the Minister perhaps just suggest what can be done to help those people so they don't get into debt which they didn't expect to be?
Speaker, of course, there's help within job centres. There's also citizens' advice. There's a help to claim process available there. But where people do make genuine errors, indeed where they have overpaid for various reasons, we are of course sympathetic to make sure that we don't put them in a position where it's incredibly difficult for them to repay those amounts.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 15.
Mr. Speaker, we are doing a great deal to bear down on economic inactivity. As of August of this year, the figures show that over half the increase in economic activity that occurred during the pandemic has since unwound, and that's over 300,000 people into work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State's comments suggesting unemployed over 50s should consider becoming delivery riders clearly shows the government is failing to help older workers into stable employment. Rather than glorifying precarious work in the gig economy, will he commit to rolling out a plan that gives older workers the dignity, respect and support they deserve to rejoin the workforce?
Well, I think it's very unfortunate when any member of this House looks down on a certain category of job which is employing hundreds of thousands of people perfectly satisfactorily. And in fact, in that interview, and I quote, I said, I think as a department, we shouldn't be prescriptive, referring to the over 50s, so we're not here to start pontificating about whether people should or should not go into work, etc. So hopefully, Mr. Speaker, that has put the record straight. We're doing a huge amount to support those over 50 who've retired prematurely, including the midlife MOT, returnerships, the tax changes that we've made around pensions, and we will continue to support people, which is why we're seeing those inactivity rates above 50 declining quite strongly.
Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sickness and sick pay are actually an anchor when it comes to getting people back into work, as well as helping to grow the economy. And that's why the Centre for Progressive Change actually produced an excellent report, which has support from members across this House. And with my, therefore, right honourable friend, meet with me and the honourable member for right honourable member for Whittam, who supported it as well, in order to look at the proposals made, so we can really help sick pay improve, which has the backing of 75% of British businesses.
Thank my honourable friend for that question. I'd be very happy either for myself or the relevant minister to meet with him or the right honourable member for Whittam.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we all want to see both unemployment and economic inactivity as low as possible. But the Office of National Statistics, quoted approvingly by the Minister a few minutes ago, reports that this spring's quarter showed that there was a large fall in the number of people moving from economic inactivity into employment, and that the net movement from employment to economic inactivity was the largest since the COVID autumn of 2020. Given that this is the Department's priority, what assessment has you made of why this is going wrong?
Well, my assessment of economic inactivity, Mr. Speaker, is that it is falling. It has fallen by around 350,000 or more since its peak during the pandemic, and that leaves us at below the average rate of economic inactivity across the G7, across the European Union, and across the OECD. We are making real progress and will continue to do so.
Corey McCarthy.
Question 17, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our aim is to make the right decision as early as possible in a claim. In 2022-23, there were 80,000 SSCS appeal tribunal hearings, with 50,000 overturned. We recognise that the overturn rate at appeal is high. However, the numbers must be seen in the context of overall decisions. The majority of appeal tribunal hearings relate to PIP. Since PIP was introduced, 8% of initial decisions have been appealed and 4% overturned at a hearing.
Corey McCarthy.
Thank the Minister for that response, but I think he's being very selective in his use of statistics. The most recent tribunal stats show that there's an increasing number of cases, certainly something that's borne out by my constituents contacting me. The vast majority are being overturned. So why aren't we getting it right first time? Surely it's a huge waste of resources to be taking so many cases to tribunal.
Well, there's no advantage to anybody of the right outcome not being achieved at the very earliest point. And of course, there's a number of reasons. She asked why. We often see tribunals reach different decisions, for example, drawing different conclusions on the same evidence, cogent evidence being presented orally within those tribunals, or even perhaps written evidence being provided at the hearing, which hasn't previously been shared. But we are taking steps. For example, we're presenting officers feeding back into the department and other steps to make sure that more decisions are got right at the first opportunity.
David
Question number 18, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer question 18 and 20 together. Every day, our work coaches are helping people of all ages and all backgrounds to overcome barriers, build their confidence and move and progress in work. For young people, we've specialised support via the DWP Youth Offer. We've extended our job centre support for people in work and on low incomes, helping them to increase their earnings, move into better paid and quality jobs and improve their prospects through in-work progression. Plus, we're providing, Mr. Speaker, additional work coach time, boosting the skills support, meaning that we're truly opening up opportunities for all.
Welcome my honourable friend's strong commitment to social mobility, and I share her approach. However, what are the government doing to ensure that young people in my constituency of Bexheath and Crayford have the jobs they need and greater opportunities to succeed?
I agree, and I'm determined to ensure everyone, regardless of their background or postcode, can succeed in Bexley Heath and Crayford and beyond. And serving my honourable friend's constituency as part of the DWP Youth Offer, we've a youth hub working in partnership with Youth Build Ventures, helping young people build their confidence with tailored wraparound support, assisting them to move into those local jobs.
Mr. Speaker, degree apprenticeships are a great way for those who are socially less well off to get into employment and avoid the cost associated with going to a degree through other routes. So what steps is the Minister taking to help more people achieve that ambition?
I agree, Mr. Speaker. It's key young people get the right opportunities for them to progress and thrive and move into that long-term sustainable work, and apprenticeships are crucial in driving growth and social mobility. They boost business skills, improve people's earnings, Mr. Speaker, and progression opportunities. My honourable friend will be pleased to see there is a new youth hub open in Walsall shortly, and our work coaches will be working with Walsall College for that place-based tailored employability support for his area.
Speaker, the biggest bar to young people finding employment in the lakes and the dales is the fact there is nowhere affordable for them to live, with average house prices 12 times average incomes and the collapse of the long-term rented sector into the Airbnb sector. Would she choose to make the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales special areas, pilot areas, for making sure that the only homes that we build there are affordable homes for people who will make their lives there, work and contribute to our economy, so that we don't run out of a workforce?
Well, I think we can agree on one thing, that his area is a very special area. We have, meantime, recruited 37 progression leads at DWP who will work locally with employers and job centres to sort that progression and retention challenge. But, of course, I think some of those questions are for another department.
Taxpayer.
19, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the job centre teams in North Devon are working day and night to fill the vacancies in my honourable friend's constituency. This includes inviting employers into the JCP and also having upcoming events with sector-based work academy programmes, including one that is about to happen with the NHS Trust in Barnstaple.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment in North Devon is well below the national average due to the high proportion of retired people and a lack of homes those working can afford. Businesses and public sector alike are reporting high vacancy levels. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to ensure we do not see further business closures due to a lack of homes that workers can afford?
Well, I visited North Devon to meet with my honourable friend and discuss these issues in April, and she has my full support in the work that she is doing, and the department is fully behind the work that was trying to ensure that we are addressing these problems. Clearly, these are matters that are being addressed by DLUC on an ongoing basis, but I can assure her she has my full support.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 22, please.
Mr. Speaker, sickness and supporting those who are sick in the workplace is an important focus of the department, which is why we are consulting on occupational health and making sure that more businesses take up that as something to offer their employees.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 17 million days are lost every year due to negative workplace cultures and well-being of staff. Part of that is down to bullying in the workplace, which is quite prevalent across many workplaces. So I want to ask the Secretary of State what steps he is taking to look at workplace cultures and particularly bullying at work, and if he will meet with me to discuss my bill, which looks to put a recourse to that into law.
I thank the honourable lady for her question, and like her, I take, and my ministerial colleagues take bullying in the workplace extremely seriously. There is no place for that in our country, and I'd be very happy for her to have a meeting with the relevant minister at DWP.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Number 25, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In April, we announced plans to address this issue by introducing a retrospective national insurance credit. This will ensure more people, especially women, have the opportunity to obtain a full state pension.
Thank you,
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The high income child benefit charge is potentially a scandal waiting to happen. Currently, families have to apply for a benefit they know they are not entitled to, so that the stay-at-home parent, usually the mother, gets the national insurance credits that they need for her state pension. The government, it's good to hear that they're doing something, but they need to reform the process further, or will they agree to at least put some comms in? Because I certainly hadn't heard of the changes in April. Well, I'm glad that the Honourable Lady agrees with them, and I assure her that we'll be bringing forward them as soon as we can.
Right, let us come to topicals. Alexander Stafford.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I begin by welcoming my new opposite number to her post. I know that she will agree with me that it is an honour and a privilege to be associated with this department, whether on that side of the House or this, and the very important mission that I know we both share to look after the most vulnerable. I look forward to a constructive engagement with her in the weeks and months to come. My department, Mr. Speaker, continues to focus on supporting the most vulnerable through cost of living payments, pension credit, the benefit system more generally, bearing down on fraud and error, and promoting work, and in particular, as we've been discussing, reducing economic inactivity.
Under Stafford.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Will the Secretary of State join with me in welcoming the recent decision on the National Disability Strategy, which allows us to get on and improve the lives of so many disabled people?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his question? I very much welcome the Court of Appeal's decision in July, meaning that the National Disability Strategy is lawful. The Government is now able to continue with the important work of implementing this long-term strategy, and I can confirm that my honourable friend, the Minister for Disabled People, will be coming forward with further details of some of the individual commitments that we'll be making around that committee, that strategy shortly.
Can I welcome the Shadow Secretary of State, Liz Kendall, to her position?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his kind words. But whatever he says about economic inactivity, it remains a serious problem in this country, with the UK lagging behind all other G7 countries in terms of workforce participation since the pandemic. Indeed, last month, the number of people off work due to long-term sickness hit an all-time high. And what, Mr. Speaker, is this government's response? The Chancellor tells the over 50s to get off the golf course, and the DWP Secretary tells them to literally get on their bike. Isn't the truth that this government's failure to cut waiting lists, sort social care and have a proper plan for reforming our job centres is harming individuals and our economy as a whole?
Well, Mr. Speaker, to the extent that the Right Honourable Lady was suggesting that economic inactivity was worse in our country than I think she may have said all other economies or similar economies, that just simply is not the case. It is true that it spiked during the pandemic, but nonetheless, it is, as I said earlier, it's a lower rate on average, lower than the average across the OECD, the EU and the G7. The Right Honourable Lady makes the point about those who are long-term sick and disabled. That's why we're bringing forward pilots like Workwell. That's why we're rolling out universal support, to make sure that we bring together the world of work with the world of health to the better of those that we look after.
Liz Kendall.
This isn't just about the over 50s. Is the Secretary of State aware that the biggest relative jump in economic inactivity due to sickness is amongst young people, with mental health being the biggest concern? Labour has a plan to transform mental health in this country, paid for by closing private equity loopholes. When will this government act and put a proper plan in place?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is a proper plan in place, and I would invite the Right Honourable Lady to spend some time looking more closely at the announcements that were made, particularly at the time of the last fiscal statement, particularly around Workwell, around universal support, around the work that we're doing with the National Health Service and other agencies to make sure that we bring together, as I say, the world of work and support, particularly for those with mental health conditions.
Nigel Mills.
The Health and Safety Executive website currently makes no mention of the aerated concrete issue that we all heard about at the end of last week. Could we be assured that the Executive has the resource and the motivation to get that guidance out there so employers and other building owners know what they should be doing in this situation?
Mr. Speaker, the HSE's focus has been today on raising awareness of RAC through their engagement and their stakeholder groups via the public sector, and was actually raised on a bulletin back in April 2021. I will look into the point he's made, but I'll be certain that there has been clear guidance to those that need it.
Liz Twist.
Mr. Speaker, thousands of women who have been underpaid their state pensions due to departmental mistakes are going to be forced to wait until the end of 2024 to see this error addressed. Does the Minister really think this is acceptable?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady asked me about this last time, and I believe I informed her previously that all alive people will be receiving the benefits that they are entitled to by the end of this year.
What action is the government taking to deal with the difficulties that many disabled people face with accessing the support they need? And in particular, has there been a move back to face-to-face contacts to be made as part of these assessments and decisions in the benefit system?
Well, what we have done is, of course, there has been a diversity of assessment channels made available to people, but the key point is that anybody who wants to have a face-to-face appointment is able to have one. They can request one, and that will be facilitated, and I think that is important. And job centres will be at the leading edge of delivering on our new supported employment programme, universal support. Of course, we've got Workwell coming on stream as well. We don't want to write anybody off. Where people want to work, they want to try work, we should be supporting that wherever we can, and that's precisely what we're all about.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent has cerebral palsy, a lifelong condition for which there's no prospect of improvement and which affects her mobility and balance. Despite this, she has faced repeated unnecessary and inaccurate reassessments for PIP and lost her PIP mobility at the most recent assessment. The DWP justified the decision by saying it was advised that her last fall was over 3 months prior to the consultation. So my question to the Minister is, what kind of system demands that people with lifelong conditions regularly have to hurt themselves in order to receive the support they're entitled to?
I would obviously want to see the details of the case in question before commenting on it, so perhaps he could kindly share those details with me. Of course, one of the things that we are focused on is getting to a place where people with conditions or disabilities that are unlikely to improve or only likely to deteriorate are not having to go through repeat assessments. That is the objective that we are working towards through the white paper reforms. I hear a lot of chuntering from the opposition benches. I'll be absolutely delighted if they would get on and support our reforms so we can make those improvements.
Ben Rose.
Mr. Speaker, universal credit's been hugely effective in making sure it always pays to work. But for job seekers with no savings who used to be paid daily or weekly, the 5-week wait for their first payment can plunge them into debt, whether it's a DWP advance or other loans. Will ministers consider the proposals in Poverty Trapped for initial payments to be made at the same daily or weekly frequency as a job seeker was previously paid, so they can focus on finding a job rather than juggling their debts?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell my honourable friend that there are no plans to change the assessment period and payment structure of universal credit, but I'm very happy for him to sit down with officials and discuss his paper.
Alex Davies-Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A constituent battling MS recently came to one of my surgeries. His PIP application was refused without ever receiving a face-to-face assessment, and he did request one. The automated letter dismissing his appeal used incredibly insulting and derogatory language without ever meeting him. The Minister's Department declared my constituent fit and able, despite this clearly not being the case. Now, I'm doing whatever I can to support my constituent, but surely the Minister will agree that PIP applicants deserve face-to-face assessments rather than this dismissive, humiliating letter language.
If people wish to have a face-to-face assessment, then they ought to be able to have one, and that is the position. There are claimants where a different form of assessment, a telephone assessment or a virtual assessment is more appropriate for them, and it's perhaps something that they want, but there should be that choice available to people, and providers should be facilitating that. Perhaps again, if she would kindly share the details of that case with me, I will look at it as a matter of urgency.
Simon Judd.
I warmly welcome the considerable progress this Conservative government has made in supporting pensioners. The triple lock, targeted support of the cost of living are welcome in my part of Devon. Can my right honourable friend outline how this Conservative government will ensure this great progress continues?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. The triple lock was a Conservative invention. It's something that we pledged in our manifesto, and it is something that the Secretary of State will be looking at again this year when he makes his decision on benefits.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you'll be aware in 2016 that the UN committee that's responsible for monitoring the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People published a very damning report that found the government had systematically discriminated against disabled people in breach of their rights. Last week, the UN committee reviewed evidence describing the further deterioration of disabled people's circumstances and rights since 2016, but the government refused to attend. Isn't this just another kick in the face for disabled people?
Well, I don't accept the Honourable Lady's characterisation of the situation. What has happened is that we've followed all of the committee's procedures. We are engaging with this process in good faith, and we will present our progress at the session in March 2024. It is rather frustrating, is it not, that often the Honourable Lady gives the impression that this country isn't a world leader when it comes to disability issues. We have seen, for example, the Equality Act, which is the cornerstone of ensuring equalities legislation, the BSL Act, the Down Syndrome Act, other steps forward we've taken. We should be supporting that.
Mr. Speaker, I'm fortunate to represent a part of the country that is blessed with near full employment. However, businesses in Bracknell and beyond really struggle to recruit enough staff. Could the Secretary of State please reassure me that his department will leave no stone unturned in getting as many people as possible back into the workplace?
Well, I welcome the good news, but also accept the challenge, and I have visited Bracknell before to meet with my honourable friend, and happy to sit down with him and the local job centres to ensure we are definitely addressing the vacancy issues that he has.
Mike Ainsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I met with the Citizen Advice Bureau in Cheshire, West and Chester. They informed me that 75% of those that appeal for their PIP assessments win. Why doesn't the Minister get it right in the first place? And what is he doing at pace to address that?
That's exactly right.
Of course, I'm very appreciative to Citizens Advice Bureaus around the country for all of the work that they do supporting constituents in each of our constituencies. In the interest of time, Mr. Speaker, I'll just refer him back to the points I made earlier about the steps we're taking.
Arumba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the recent changes to access for means-tested benefits for those in receipt of vaccine damage payments are extremely welcome. Could I thank the Minister for his engagement on that? And will he join me in paying tribute to those who campaigned for that change in the law, including my constituent, Sheila Ward?
I pay full credit to Mrs Ward and also my honourable friend, and was reported in the Stoke Sentinel, which I was reading with interest on this particular issue, that there is a genuine change to be made, and it has been a long-standing campaign, and all parties should be most pleased with the outcome reached.
Jamie Stone.
Mr Speaker, I probably, in all honesty, ought to declare an interest in this, but pensioners living in Edinburgh, Glasgow, do not have the same sort of increases in cost of living, such as running a car, buying groceries, heating a house, as pensioners living in a remote and faraway constituency such as mine. Can I ask that the government looks at ways of targeting these particularly hard-hit people?
Well, of course, Mr Speaker, we do look at particularly targeting harder hit pensioners through pension credit, and I know that my honourable friend has done a huge amount, for example, to promote that. But we're always open to having further ideas and discussions, and if the honourable gentleman would like to come forward with further ideas, then that's something we would certainly chat about.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have been contacted many times each month by parents left seriously out of pocket by their ex-spouses' failures to pay the child's maintenance owed. So, what steps is the government taking to ensure that parents are able to receive their child maintenance on time, so that many families are not left subjected either to coercive controls by their ex-spouses or left out of pocket?
I thank the Honourable Lady for making those points. Child maintenance payments keep around 160,000 children out of poverty each year and are absolutely vital, and they play a key role ensuring that both parents play their part in supporting their children, whether they live with them or not. If she has particular cases or interests, I'm happy to meet with the Honourable Lady.
Alison Poulos, final question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A constituent of mine has a small work pension, rendering her ineligible for pension credit, yet still struggling to get by. Another constituent is 80 and misses out on pension credit by just £10 and has contacted me several times, angry and irked that he has to pay now for his TV licence. Will the ministers review the rules on pension credit, because the ineligibility for so many of the passported benefits leaves many of my constituents out of pocket? They want to be eligible for it and they aren't.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Obviously, without looking at the individual case, I think it's very important to note that the threshold has gone up significantly, so it's worth questioning whether they are now eligible. If not, applications to the Household Support Fund can also be helpful, and also local councils may be able to offer housing benefit support. But if there's an individual case that you'd like to write to me about, I'm happy to respond.
That completes the questions. Those who wish to leave. Before I call the member to ask the urgent question, I wish to make a short statement about subject